What would you do if you moved in with a family that turns into animals in the most awkward of situations? Imagine dealing and fusing with these situations yourself, since it's a typical occurrence for them. This is the story of an orphan named Toru and the Soma family as they navigate their way through school life, friendships, and a family curse. Stay tuned and get to know more about the wacky lives of Toru and the Soma family. The main story starts on a hot and sunny September day. A girl was just about to leave her tent and bid her mother goodbye. Well, more like the picture of her mother, really, as she asked her to look after their makeshift house. As the girl made her way through the forest, she suddenly heard the sound of a chime coming from a house nearby. Out of curiosity, she went to check it out and found 12 stones painted to resemble the 12 zodiac animals. She was in the middle of admiring it when some older guy appeared. Not just the girl, but he too was surprised since he wasn't expecting anyone roaming around the area, especially a girl like her. The girl apologized profusely for intruding, although it didn't seem like the guy really minded. And soon, they instead start talking about the zodiac folklore, and she notices how the collection is missing the cat. It turns out that the girl was referring to another version of the zodiac folklore, one that her mother had used to tell her during bedtime before. Due to the unfortunate fate of the cat in the story after it was tricked by the rat, the girl couldn't help but feel bad for it, to the point that she swore she'd quit being a dog and become a cat instead. Kids and their ideas are quite adorable at this age, right? But then they'd cringe later on when reminded of these memories. We've all been there, don't deny it. Hearing her story, the guy curiously wondered how the cat would react if he heard about it. The girl, of course, didn't understand. After all, talking cats is just a worldwide dream that would never come true. Changing the topic, the man then asked the girl about her zodiac sign. But before she could answer, he was hit with a school bag. A boy, who was the culprit, then reprimands the guy to quit flirting, else the FBI would come barging in. The boy then turned to the girl and asked if his cousin had given out signs of being a lolicon. It seems like the two teenagers are already acquainted. As such, introductions are in order, at least for the bystanders. The girl's name is Toru, who happens to be Yuki's classmate, and who in turn is the cousin of the lolicon named Soma. Yuki then asked what brought her to their house, which made her panic. After all, who in their right mind would admit that they're illegally squatting in a tent on someone's property? Having no intentions of giving herself up, she attempted to flee, only to be stopped by Yuki, who offered to walk with her since they were going the same way anyway. Although unwilling at first, Toru eventually agreed. Once they arrived at school, Toru was scolded by Minagawa Motoko, the self-proclaimed representative of Yuki, together with her entourage, for being too chummy with their Prince Yuki. It turns out they're actually a school club dedicated to everything Yuki. Obsessive fangirls, much like Rukawa's cheer squad. Just then, a pair of girls, exuding delinquent energies, get into the picture, and tells them to stop. While the blonde tomboy named Uo threatened to tear them apart, the black-haired Hana gave a cold stare that sent the Prince Yuki Club running for their lives. The two then tried to make Toru feel better in their own ways. Later in their cooking class, the three discussed why Toru had gone to school with Yuki. She explained that it was all just a coincidence. After that, Hana warns her about the strange wave surrounding the pretty boy. It's one of her wave reports that she herself couldn't explain. As for Uo, she mentioned the sophomore student who confessed her feelings for Yuki but was brutally rejected and was even sent to her. When she tried to hug him, the poor girl was traumatized. Although based on who you'd ask, it was Yuki who was wronged. Soon after, Uo invites Toru to go shopping after school. Unfortunately, Toru can't go since she has a part-time job. Although Toru insists that she's only doing it to earn tuition fees, Hana knows that it's because she's saving since she wants to support herself after high school. Toru stiffened when Uo suddenly asked if she was still living with her grandfather and awkwardly confirmed right after. As it turns out, Toru's friends have no idea that she's living in a tent on her own. Toru couldn't tell her friends about her living conditions since, knowing them, they'd probably charge to her grandfather's house or something. Especially Uo with her motorcycle. After school, Toru was rushing to her job when she found Yuki by the lockers. She thanked him for accompanying her earlier, while Yuki just smiled and apologized for Shigure's behavior. Toru insisted there was nothing to apologize for, since they actually bonded by talking about the zodiac folklore. This reminded Yuki of Toru's opinion of the cat, to which he disagreed, claiming that the cat was just a nasty idiot. Clearly, the only nice thing about this dude is his face, seeing as he can't even judge properly. Yuki then explained the different versions of the zodiac folklore and emphasized that the cat had no place in it whatsoever. In the end, he once again calls the cat an idiot, especially for wanting to be part of the zodiacs when there isn't anything good about it. Just then, Toru remembered that she was supposed to rush to her part-time job and attempted to leave, but Yuki stopped her and told her how she looked unwell and how she should take care of herself. To answer some questions you might be wondering about this anime's protagonist, let's go back to that time, when Toru was just 3 and her father died. Ever since then, it was her mother who supported her. Unfortunately, she too left in an untimely manner. No one had wanted to take Toru in after that, except her grandfather. But as fate would have it, her grandfather had to renovate his house, during which he wanted to live with his other children. Toru couldn't come live with them, so she decided to live alone in the meantime. Not wanting to bother even her friends, she decided to start living in a tent alone. As for her living expenses, she gets by working as a cleaning lady. For months, Toru remained steadfast, unfazed by any weather and hardship life threw at her. Even Toru's co-workers couldn't help but admire her resilience and enthusiasm at work. More of those sob tales later. That evening, Yuki and Shigure were just coming back from eating out. Shigure was complaining about their eating habits, to which Yuki had the perfect retort. At the end of their little squabble, they drew to the conclusion that they needed a woman who could help them with the house chores, since they were both obviously no good. Just then, they saw Toru walking back from her work and followed her to her home. When Toru arrived at her tent, she had wanted to finish her homework for tomorrow, but suddenly felt dizzy, so she went out to wash her face. To her surprise, she found Yuki and Shigure in front of her tent. Shigure immediately burst out laughing. Fortunately, Yuki didn't share the same sentiments. After her secret was exposed, the two gentlemen brought Toru back to their house. Yuki then explained to Toru that their family owned all the land in the area. While Shigure still couldn't get over the fact that Toru lived in a tent, she still politely asked to be allowed to live in that area, at least just until her grandfather's house renovations were over. Briefly stopping his laughs, Shigure told her then that the spot where she lived was pretty dangerous, but Toru insists that she'll be fine. The other two had different thoughts, however, especially when Toru was on the verge of passing out. Toru seemed to be having a fever. Shigure offered to get some ice for her. Only when he opened the door to where the kitchen was supposed to be, it turned out to be just a room full of trash. Talk about a pigsty. Suddenly, a wolf howled from a distance, making Shigure alert. He then told them that the part of the cliff near the area where she lives just crumbled. Toru asked how he knew that, to which Shigure simply answered that he's got animal instincts. In her feverish state, Toru decided to believe him and started worrying if perhaps her tent was fine. To make sure, they went back to her tent and found it destroyed by the landslide. Toru didn't hesitate to jump into the wreckage to at least recover her mother's picture, breaking down into tears as she did. That is, until Shigure finally stopped her, promising they would return for it in the morning. When that didn't work, Shigure told her that Toru's mother would be worried if anything happened to her. Once the three were back at the Soma household, Shigure tucked Toru in for the night. Just as he was thinking that Toru had been having an awful night, it turned out it wasn't the worst she'd been through. Once again, with the sob backstory, what Toru regretted the most was when she missed the chance to say, "See you when you get back," the morning her mother died. Back then, Toru had stayed up all night studying for a quiz, and that's why she couldn't wake up early to bid her mother a good day at work. Since then, she had always believed that it was the reason that her mother died. That's why Toru is doing her best to finish school, as it was her mother's wish to let Toru enjoy being a high school student, which was something she had not experienced herself. For that reason alone, Toru couldn't let herself be defeated by a simple fever. But alas, she is nothing but a human. Toru's delirious confession ended with her finally falling asleep. Hearing her story, Yuki couldn't help but feel how amazing she was. But for Shigure, calling Toru amazing is actually an insult to her. Wanting to do something for her, Yuki prepared to return to the wreckage. Shigure offered to help, but with an intimidating mischief behind Yuki, there was no need for it. That night, Toru dreamed of her mother, who was reminding her to just follow her own pace and take things easy so as not to compromise her health, assuring her that she'll get to where she needed to be eventually. Then the scenario changed to a mysterious young boy placing a cap on Toru's head. As if a spell was being broken, Toru suddenly woke up in tears and remembered that she needed to dig up her dead mother's picture from the wreckage. To her surprise, Yuki greeted her and gave her the photo, acting all secretive when asked how he managed to get it. Instead, he offered to bring the rest of her stuff upstairs, offering for her to stay with them in the meantime. Toru tried to refuse the offer, not wanting to impose more than she already did. Suddenly, Shigure asked if she could clean and do chores. Long story short, Toru landed a stay-in job, where she could even wake up to 2 eye candies daily. Typical Toru. She felt so grateful and wanted to return the favor somehow. But Yuki assured her that there was no need. As if by deja vu, Yuki told her to just be herself, following her own pace. Eventually, she'll settle in and find her place in the house. Shigure asked if Yuki was all right with this, since they'd been bunking with a girl. The teenage boy said it'd be fine as long as she didn't hug him. And so, the day proceeded with Shigure and Yuki helping Toru fix her room. Just then, an orange-haired guy jumped to the floor after crashing the ceiling and challenged Yuki to a fight, who in turn brushed it off as he called the new guy weak. The orange boy didn't take that well and swung at Yuki instead. Toru tried to stop Orange Boy, but she slipped and accidentally hugged him. Yuki gasped as the guy Kyo turned into a cat in Toru's arms. Hearing the commotion, Shigure appeared as he asked if Kyo had already come in. Toru was still trying to process everything, horrified that she might have somehow turned Orange Boy into a cat, like some evil witch. Anyways, she tried rushing the cat to a hospital, but a block of wood dropped from the ceiling, knocking her out and landing on Shigure and Yuki. This time, the moment she touched them, they turned into a dog and a rat. Toru was once again dumbfounded, although the three just had embarrassed looks on their adorable animal faces. As all these commotions were happening, a mailman called from the front door for some package. Toru rushed out to him, holding the 3 animals, or should we say guys, in her arms and telling the mailman that they were all animals, like some crazy lady in the middle of the forest, which she actually is in a way. The mailman, not knowing the context of the situation, and once again asked for the package to be received so he could be on his way. That's when Mr. Dog brought the family seal to receive it, and the mailman commended it for being smart and rushed out. Not long after, the 3 started arguing in front of the bewildered Toru. As if turning into animals isn't weird enough, they can even speak the human language, and they thought living in a tent was crazy? When things calmed down a bit, Shigure explained that all of them were possessed by animal spirits, particularly the Zodiac animal spirits, and it was not just them. This phenomenon has been going on in their family for hundreds of years now. However, there isn't anything special other than they can still speak the human language and communicate with their respective animal species. This transformation only happens when they're weakened or hugged by someone of the opposite gender. As if on cue, they eventually return to being human again after a while, only they're in their birth suits. After putting on their clothes, Shigure made sure that Toru was still as sane as she could be. Fortunately, although Toru is still trying to make sense of things, it doesn't look like she'll go nuts anytime soon. The older man also apologized on behalf of Kyo, making sure not to skip teasing him for letting Toru sneak up on a trained martial artist like him. After all, if it weren't for that, then their secrets wouldn't have been revealed. Instead of feeling guilty, or maybe because he's just a tsundere, Kyo started acting up again, which got him and Yuki into another squabble. Only this time, it resulted in Toru actually getting hurt for real. That was the last straw, even for Yuki, that he decided to take on Kyo seriously. As the two started squaring up, Toru wanted to stop them, but Shigure assured her that the fight would be over soon and that Yuki would win. Sure enough, he actually did, and even sent Kyo flying towards the koi pond. Yuki then went to Toru's side and asked how she was doing. As for the little flower, she's actually more worried about the orange boy instead of herself, to which Yuki dismisses coldly, much to Toru's surprise. It seems like there's more to Yuki than the princely persona he's showing everyone at school. Speaking of school, Toru just remembered she's still actually a student who needs to attend some classes, and so Shigure tells her to go get prepared as he too will be going out to report to Akito about this incident. Hearing this, Yuki's mood suddenly fell, and asked Shigure if Toru's memories will be erased as well. The older man assured him that it's highly unlikely since this situation was different from before. Not that it's any better. Seeing as it's now out of his hands, Yuki went to start preparing for school as well. As for Shigure, he told Kyo to take care of the house, and to make sure he apologized to Toru later. At school, Uo and Hana interrogated Toru about what had happened. After all, it's very unlikely for her to just oversleep, not to mention be late. And when Uo mentioned that Yuki was in the same situation, the members of his fan club started getting sus. Fortunately, thanks to Hana and Uo's protection, there's no way for them to get any more details from Toru. Meanwhile, Yuki inconspicuously listens to the trio talk from the side. Later that day, Yuki and Toru were alone when the prince curiously asked her why she didn't tell her friends about their family secret. This made Toru worry that perhaps she had made him anxious. She assured him, though, that she wouldn't blab it to anyone since she was taught by her mom against spilling secrets to others. In fact, she's willing to go to any lengths just to prove her sincerity. Then again, it isn't about Yuki trusting her or not. It's just that he's worried that they might end up erasing her memories in the end, just like that traumatizing experience he had when he was just a kid. Yuki eventually came back from memory lane and apologized to Toru, explaining that whatever Akito might decide in the end will be final, and even Yuki won't be able to do anything about it. After a small incident that caused Yuki to transform yet again, Toru assured him that she's okay with losing her memories. And instead, she asks Yuki if he can remain friends with her after. Before he could answer, Yuki suddenly turned back into his human form. As Yuki started fixing his clothes, Toru noticed his necktie was all crooked and offered to help him fix it. While Toru did, Yuki remembered Akito's words about how normies would be sickened once they learned about their curse. And yet, here stood in front of him the proof that disproves Akito's claims. As if to make sure of himself, Yuki asked Toru if she felt sickened. Thinking that he was talking about her fever, Toru responded that she was feeling all better now. Yuki didn't push and just ended the conversation by asking to go home together. By the time Toru returned to her room at Shigure's house, Kyo had already patched up the roof. It was just a temporary fix, however, and he told her that he'd call in an expert later. Kyo then tried to apologize for what happened earlier, but was cut short when Shigure announced his arrival and made fun of Kyo. This made Orange Boy leave instead, and when Toru tried following after him, he shut the door to her face. As he did, a paper bag containing a gray cap fell. Anyways, Shigure actually came back bearing some good news. The final verdict would be that Toru can live with them as long as she keeps their secret. Yuki is skeptical about this and firmly believes that Shigure and Akito are up to something and plans to involve innocent sweet Toru in all of it. But Shigure shamelessly denies these accusations. According to Shigure, he and Akito talked about Toru, and from what Shigure could tell, it seemed like Akito had taken a liking to her, and thinks that this arrangement might be a good opportunity for him, Yuki, and even Kyo. The next day, Toru tidied up the house. Yuki is amazed at the amount of work Toru did, on top of making a meal for him. Just then, Shigure and Kyo came in while arguing. Toru wondered why Kyo was so upset, to which Shigure explained how he tricked him into taking a school transfer exam, and that he'll be going to the same school as Yuki and Toru, much to Yuki's annoyance. Turns out, Kyo actually passed the entrance exam at an exclusive school near his place, but he never showed up. Instead, he went to train in the woods for months in order to beat Yuki. Toru has some questions, but fearing that it might just upset Kyo further, she decides to just keep them to herself. What would you do if you were in Toru's shoes and had a bunch of roomies that were mystical animals? Tell us in the comments down below. Fast forward to the next day, Kyo is surrounded by a lot of girls in school, and he's feeling quite uncomfortable. Yuki came into the room and was asked immediately by the girls to introduce them to Kyo. Yuki refused, telling them that they were not that close. Uo, on the other hand, liked Kyo's hair color and told Toru how it was similar to Kyoko's, Toru's mom. Hana comments that she feels the same waves towards Kyo that she feels with Yuki. As for Kyo, he couldn't take it anymore, and he jumped out the window to safety. Yuki and Toru eventually followed to check how Kyo was doing, but it only ended up with Kyo getting all rough and rude again toward Toru, so much so that she was pushed to leave. Kyo did feel guilty about it soon after, to the point that he didn't even say anything when Yuki once again insulted him. Later that night, on her way back from work, Toru sighed and thought about what happened earlier with the boys, feeling dejected that the cat she likes so much now hates her. Just then, she heard footsteps nearby and froze in place, thinking that a pervert was lurking in the dark bamboo forest. She was so scared that she swung her bag to whatever was behind her, not knowing that it was Kyo coming to pick her up. Although that was a pretty heavy swing, Kyo seemed unfazed. Toru tried to make an excuse, and after a bit of unintentional teasing, they eventually cleared things up between them. The girl then shares about how she loves the Zodiac cat and how she always wanted to be born in its year, not to mention be friends with Kyo. As Kyo acted all tsundere again, Toru realized that in contrast to Yuki being all nice and princely on the outside, but tough on the inside, Kyo is the total opposite. The next day, in preparation for the school cultural festival, the Class 1D, where our trio belongs, decided to do a rice ball stand. Yuki asked the class what fillings they'd like to sell. Toru suggested tricolor rice balls, which the Prince Yuki Club immediately rejected. Kyo then suggested a rice ball battle royale. This time the class rejected it in unison. Kyo got quite upset when Yuki suggested a buy 3 get 1 promo, and it was collectively agreed by everyone. After a bunch of cats suddenly appeared and latched onto Kyo, he left the classroom. Eventually, Kyo went back to class later that day, and Toru invited him to play Rich Man, Poor Man. Kyo didn't want to do it at first, but after being instigated by Uo, he took the challenge and even added a wager to the game where the loser gets to do everyone's cleaning duty, as expected. Kyo ended up losing. After another squabble with Yuki later in the afternoon, Kyo noticed that Yuki seemed to be quite upset more than usual for some reason. This in turn made Toru worry for the aloof prince. Later that night, Toru was just about done with her work and was distracted by thinking about Yuki, feeling as if he keeps bottling his feelings inside. Suddenly, she tripped and fell on a flight of stairs. When she came to, she saw a kid sitting on a sofa and laughing at her. The kid then came closer and saw the notebook with her name on it. The kid seems to recognize her and starts speaking to her in German, at the end of which he even kisses her on the cheek, making Toru all red. As she rushed to leave, she left behind the cultural festival poster which the boy picked up curiously. Once Toru got out of the building, Yuki was there to pick her up. Seeing as this is her chance to address her worries concerning Yuki, Toru tells him that he can share with her anything that's bothering him. After Yuki accidentally transformed again, he started sharing how he's somewhat jealous of Kyo for being able to get along with people easily, something that he had struggled to do ever since. Toru starts telling him that he's actually a good person that everyone likes, but he insists that it's only because he wants them to like him. When they arrived at home later that evening, they saw the news about a typhoon hitting Japan. After making some excuse, Yuki anxiously leaves the house to go somewhere. When Toru followed after him, she discovered a patch of vegetable garden that Yuki had been taking care of, which was also his secret base. Yuki had wanted to cover up the plants to prevent them from getting destroyed by the typhoon, and praised Toru for being kind and offering to help, believing that it was an innate trait despite her denials. Against all struggles, the two were able to protect the garden, at the end of which, Yuki suddenly said that he'd join them next time in playing Rich Man, Poor Man. This made Toru really excited and assured him that he will have a great time playing with her friends. Yuki smiled and looked forward to the game, which made Toru even more excited as well. Later on, Toru was in the kitchen, testing out some rice ball recipes to sell at the school festival. Kyo suddenly entered the room and tried tasting one when he realized what she was doing, only to end up spitting it out since it was chive-flavored, which he didn't like at all. Anyways, after getting into another heart-to-heart, where Toru was telling Kyo how he just doesn't see the good traits that he has, Kyo was moved and commented how Toru too has good traits that she undermines. Yuki eventually joins them in the kitchen, and after Toru told him that Kyo didn't like the chive-flavored that she made, Yuki ended up shoving one in Kyo's mouth, forcing him to eat it. Although all Toru wanted was to let the two of them resolve their issues, that actually happening seemed to be just a pipe dream. Just then, someone rang their doorbell. Toru rushed to check and see who it was, and saw a young girl who introduced herself as Soma Kagura and was asking if Kyo was home. Toru tells her that he's wrestling with some chives at the moment. Hearing this, the girl expressed how happy she is now that Kyo is back. Assuming that she's related to the boys since she's also a Soma, she rushed inside to look for Kyo. As if the torture that is the rice ball is not enough, sweet girl Kagura turns out to be another bringer of misery for Kyo. Seems like everyone in this family has hidden personalities, or is it just the ones who are possessed? Anyways, as Kagura's Yaradere personality surfaces, she sends Kyo flying from a solid left, and without a moment of rest, treats him like a giant propeller. Despite Shigure's annoyance due to his house being destroyed, he fills in Toru about Kagura's unique way of showing affection, especially when it comes to Kyo, who she already considers as his future husband, after she coerced him into promising to marry her when they were still kids. Kagura believes that they are meant for each other, seeing as those who are possessed with the zodiac animal spirits don't transform when they hug each other. But really, that's just her thought since it looked like it was a one-sided love. When Shigure mentioned that Toru likes the cat Zodiac, Kagura felt threatened, declaring a challenge against our little protagonist, and bragging that Toru can never top her love for him since she even accepts his final form. Before Kagura could expound on that, however, Kyo managed to stop her. Despite his serious demeanor, though, it still ended with him being once again manhandled by his self-proclaimed future wife. One would think that by dinner time, everything will be peaceful. Unfortunately, it's just one chaos after another. Kagura's obsessiveness made her use up all the food in the house to cook for Kyo. The only problem is that Orange Boy refused to eat any of them, resulting in another outburst from her, which in turn caused another part of Shigure's house being destroyed and even wasting all the prepared food. After Kyo once again tells Kagura to just go home, she really left the house super upset, especially since even Shigure is telling her that she can't stay. Meanwhile, as Toru started cleaning up the ruined plates and dishes, Yuki offered to call for a food delivery. But before he could do so, Toru seemed to have noticed something and asked him to hold that thought. As for Kagura, she was at the store and was just about to pay for her stuff when she remembered that she had forgotten her bag. Luckily, Toru came in just in time and offered to pay for the groceries. Later that evening, while on their way home, Toru's advances to get close to Kagura seemed to not work at first. Fortunately, after some girly heart-to-heart, Kagura finally accepted Toru's genuine intentions. The two then started to head back home to prepare dinner together. But despite everything, Kyo still refused to get back down to eat. And so, this time, it was Toru who came after him and found him lounging at the roof. Toru tells Kyo how he should be thankful that someone is worrying about him, and even wants to marry him. After all, it's every girl's dream to get married. Well, almost every girl, I guess. Seeing as this was a good time to ask, Toru inquired about Kyo's training. Kyo then excitedly told her about his master and his passion for martial arts. He talked nonstop, unlike his usual self, only stopping when he thought that perhaps he's already boring Toru, which the girl denies and even attempts to make a point by giving him a jab. The next day, as Kagura hugged Kyo regretfully, Shigure asked Toru if she had figured out Kagura's zodiac animal yet, but sadly, she still hadn't. After another squabble between Kagura and Kyo, this time resulting in Kyo crashing towards the TV and Kagura running out of the house. Just then, Kagura ran into a newspaper boy. Fortunately, Yuki went in for the save by using his princely charms. Turns out Kagura is actually possessed by the pig animal, seeing as she transformed into a small boar. After all the chaos in the last couple of days, Toru realized just how much she wanted to get to know more about Kyo and Yuki, to the point that she even borrowed books about martial arts and farming from the library. But as they say, all good things must always come to an end. Out of the blue, Toru was asked by a teacher to go to the staff room because there was a phone call for her. It was her grandfather who told her that she can now move back with him. As expected, this made Toru sad. After all, she was already getting used to the fact that she's starting to become like a family of some sort with the Somas. That same day, Toru told the boys about the news. She did seem to have second thoughts about moving back with her grandfather, but she knows that she had to. To show her gratitude to them for letting her stay, Toru offered to make dinner for the last time. And as she did, she remembered one of the lessons her mom used to tell her. Toru's mother once said that, "It's all right to be selfish from time to time." Despite everything, Toru still worries about the three and makes sure to remind them about stuff once she leaves, and even leaves the address of the house just in case. She also promised to keep their secret to her grave. Toru started packing her stuff, and when she went upstairs, Shigure thought that Yuki would stop her, but Yuki knew this was a temporary arrangement anyway. And so did Kyo, but Shigure knew that they'd grown quite attached to the said outsider. On the very first morning after Toru left Shigure's house, everyone could feel just how empty it is, now that she's not living in it anymore. As for Toru, she's also worrying about the Soma boys. Although she had her own problems, she had to worry herself. At her grandfather's house, a girl came into the room and complained about how she had to share another room with Toru. Just then, Toru's grandpa came in to ask her to come downstairs. It seems like they are having a family meeting regarding where Toru had lived prior to going back to this house. They hired a private detective, fearing that Toru might turn out to be like her delinquent mom. In fact, one of Toru's cousins even dared to ask whether the Somas did anything indecent to her. Good thing Grandpa came to the rescue and slapped him across the face, scolding them good. He then apologized to Toru on their behalf, explaining that although they're not bad people, they can still be nasty. That said, Grandpa feels that just like her mother, she is better off being in a place where she can be herself and asks her what she really wants to do. Toru is grateful to her grandfather for giving her a choice and a roof over her head. And although she wants to go back to live with the Somas, she felt like it would be too much to ask to be allowed to do that. Just then, Yuki suddenly barged inside the house. Going back a couple of hours prior at Shigure's place, Kyo and Yuki are being too sensitive with Toru's absence. They were even about to get into another fight, only the tension soon died down on its own, seeing as they're both not in the mood at all. Yuki then notices the address that Toru left and makes an excuse to go for a walk. Kyo also tried to get a hold of the address, but seeing as he was too late, he had no choice but to go after Yuki instead. Not long after, Yuki, with Kyo trailing right behind him, seemed to be having a hard time finding the house. Fortunately, they did eventually manage to find it, and just in time too, as they overheard the argument and saw Grandpa's legendary slap. After they heard Toru's real feelings about staying with them, they went in to rescue their little damsel in distress. And as if they had already made prior arrangements, Yuki politely introduces himself, as polite as it can get when barging in uninvited at someone's house, while Kyo gets Toru out. Yuki even gets revenge for Toru against her nasty cousin. Meanwhile, outside the house, Kyo tells Toru that he's been feeling weird ever since she left, so he went with Yuki to look for her. Kyo also tells her that they overheard her conversation with her family, pointing out that it's okay to be selfish sometimes. Toru then started crying, wanting to go home, back to the place where she truly belongs. Yuki joins them soon after, and for once, after her mother had left, Toru felt like she'd finally found people who wanted to be with her and genuinely cared for her. Later that day, once the three finally returned back home, Kyo and Yuki's earlier fight finally proceeded. A typical day at the Soma household. Shigure then tells Toru that although it's not perfect, it's hers if she wants it. Toru smiled, feeling so at home in the middle of the chaos. The cultural festival of Kaibara High School had everyone busy. Class 1D especially is selling rice balls like hotcakes, all thanks to Yuki doing a maid cosplay. Boys, girls, and even teachers alike came to check it out. And although Yuki had been very accommodating, Toru and Kyo could tell he was far from genuine. Suddenly, a kid climbed up Yuki's shoulders, who was soon reprimanded by another man in a suit. It turns out that these two are also Somas, who are also possessed by the animal Zodiacs, making Toru excited. The young kid is called Momiji, and the older one is named Harry. Both of them seem to know Toru as well, making the boys cautious, especially Yuki, towards Harry, who also happens to be the Soma family doctor in charge of Yuki's health since he was young. On a slightly different matter, Uo and Hana noticed how Toru had been very chummy with the Soma boys and started getting concerned. Anyways, thanks to Momiji's playfulness, the family secret almost got exposed when he suddenly went to hug Toru, and he turned into a cute bunny. Fortunately, Yuki saved the day using his girly charm, allowing the rest of the Somas and Toru to escape to the rooftop. Suddenly, Harry told them to stand right next to each other. It was already too late when they realized that Harry had just wanted to take a picture of them. Not long after, Harry and Momiji left, and Kyo went after them, angry because they had been tricked. As for Yuki, he feels uneasy knowing that Akito will see the picture with him dressed as a girl. However, Yuki is upset that everyone has been calling him cute when he's a boy. Fortunately, after some counseling from Toru, the pretty boy decided to continue with the fan service. The two eventually started going back. As they did, Yuki warned Toru about Harry, as he was the one in charge of erasing memories of the normies. Before they could discuss this further, they saw Uo and Hana at the bottom of the stairs and were demanding an explanation for Toru's closeness to the Somas. Later that afternoon, Toru explained her situation and apologized to her friends for keeping it a secret. The two didn't seem to mind, although they did insist on checking out her new home and invited themselves for a sleepover. That night, the two arrived at the Soma household. Shigure, being Shigure, warmly greeted Uo and Hana and assured Toru it was all good. Kyo, however, did warn the older man to be careful of them, especially of Hana. Not that Uo is any less to be cautious about. She seems particularly very protective of Toru. The next day, after a bit of a squabble over a carton of milk, Hana and Uo finally blessed the Somas to look after Toru for now. However, this was not without a threat, which may or may not be real. Anyways, after everything had settled down, the phone suddenly rang, and Toru answered it. It turns out it was Hatori, aka Harry, asking Toru to come visit him on her day off. Toru was reluctant, but eventually gave in after Hatori threatened her with the photo he took. The day came when Toru was supposed to visit Hatori. Momiji welcomed Toru into the Soma compound, and with his help, Toru learned a bit more about the family. Once Toru met Hatori, he didn't hold back in warning her that she should stay away from the Somas as soon as she could. And although it seemed like a threat, he was just looking out for her. He didn't want her to end up like his ex-lover, who he had to erase the memories of himself after Akito had found out about their relationship and got upset. Later on, after an accident, Toru found out what Zodiac possessed Hatori. Although it was an understandable representation of a dragon, it was unexpected nonetheless. And the fact that Toru had the same reaction as Hatori's ex-lover when she first found out just made him care more for the teenage girl. It was almost the New Year's holidays, and everyone seemed to have plans on where and who to spend it with. Knowing that Toru's family would go abroad over the holidays, Uo and Hana offered to spend it with her. But Toru, being the ideal waifu, insisted that they should just spend it with their families and not worry about her. Toru also tried to pull the same stunt with the Soma boys when they told her that they were supposed to spend the holidays back at the Soma compound, although it was not because they wanted to. See, There would be a special banquet, especially for those possessed by the zodiac animals. As such, although Shigure allowed Toru to stay in the house over the holidays, she's going to be all alone until the celebrations are all over. The lady of the house assured them that she would be fine on her own and sent Yuki, Kyo, and Shigure off with a smile on her face when it was about time for them to leave. Then again, Yuki and Kyo still felt uneasy about leaving Toru on her own, and Shigure mentioning rumors about active burglars in the area doesn't help. The last straw for the teenage boys, however, was when Hana suddenly showed up and nonchalantly informed them of how this would be Toru's first New Year holiday without her mom. Without another word, the two boys ran back home, realizing that Toru's smile was just to hide what she was really feeling. As expected, the two of them saw Toru crying while staring at the photo of her mom when they arrived. As for Shigure, he's got no reason to go back. Plus, him being there should at least appease any misgivings Kyo and Yuki's absence will have. Haru Soma, another one of the Zodiacs, took it as the two wanting to avoid certain people, and that's why they didn't come, only for Shigure to mysteriously hint that it wasn't the reason at all. Back at the house, the trio were eating New Year noodles together. Toru was happy and grateful, although she also couldn't help but worry that the two would get into trouble. They assured her that they could just give a late greeting of some sort. At least, that's what they want to tell themselves. As the sun was about to rise, they went to the rooftop and greeted the first sun rays with their hopes for the coming year. A few days later, it was time for the Kaibara High School Marathon. Yuki was feeling under the weather and was told to take it easy, especially by Toru. More so, when Shigure told her that the Zodiacs transform when they're weakened. Yuki insisted he was fine, however, and Kyo's competitive spirit didn't help either, as he insisted on making the marathon another competition between them. The next day, while they were in the middle of doing the marathon, they unexpectedly met Haru, who apparently had been trying to go to Shigure's place for the past 3 days. Let's just say he's the same species as our favorite Marimo. Anyways, Haru has a special relationship with Kyo and Yuki. That's to say, Haru is to Kyo, as Kyo is to Yuki, and he is to Yuki, as Kagura is to Kyo. Was that a little too confusing? Well, that's a little quiz for you, dear viewers, so get on with it. Moving on, after Yuki's condition turned for the worse, the other persona of Haru, dubbed as Dark Haru, had a clever idea on how to get Yuki back home in his weakened state. And this is how Toru found out which zodiac animal possessed Haru. Not long after, the group finally got back home. After Shigure had a good laugh at them, he told Toru to go back to school while he took care of Yuki himself. But this was not an option for Toru, who insisted on staying. And so, Toru waited with Haru for Hatori, whom they had already contacted earlier. Haru mentioned how Yuki and Kyo's relationship seemed to have gotten better these days, and it's all thanks to Toru. He is grateful for this since he really liked those two, especially Yuki. Later that night, Hatori arrived at the house expecting to see one patient, only to realize that there were actually 2 more, after Kyo and Shigure also caught the cold. Fast forward to the day before Valentine's Day. There were already pre-Valentine's bags of chocolates handed out to the boys. Well, mostly Yuki, although there were also some for Kyo. Once the orange boy realized that it was almost the heart day, he attempted to skip school so he could hide somewhere far. As it turns out, it was all because Kagura goes crazy whenever this time of the year approaches. In fact, this time around, she even invited Yuki and Toru to go on a double date with her and Kyo on Valentine's Day. And although the orange boy was so against it, he eventually gave in after how excited the invitation made Toru. The next day, Shigure dropped off some sweets to Hatori, courtesy of Toru, who couldn't do it herself since she was on a double date with the others. Hatori then tells Shigure off by how he and Akito are using Toru as some sort of pawn to achieve each of their personal goals. Shigure insists that at least he's better than Akito, but by the looks of it, they're really not that different. Are you enjoying the video so far? Please show us some love by clicking on the like button and subscribing to our channel. Thankies! One day after school, Toru seemed to have gotten herself in trouble when the teacher called her over. When Yuki asked what it was about, Toru avoided answering by using her part-time job as an excuse and left. Later that night, Momiji came to Shigure's house to give Toru his White Day present, a sponsored hot spring trip. Although grateful for the gift, Toru was reluctant to go. That was when the boys offered to come with her so that she would at least not be alone. Meanwhile, Shigure received a call from Toru's grandfather regarding her missing school payments. As it turned out, Toru had used the money to buy the Valentine's Day presents she had given everyone. This got Kyo worked up and scolded Toru that the least she could do was enjoy the hot springs trip for all her troubles. He also decided to come with them, much to Yuki's annoyance. At the inn, the owner welcomed them herself. They were then directed to their respective rooms and told to enjoy the hot springs. While Yuki and Kyo dragged Momiji away, Toru went to the female hot springs. She was joined shortly after by the owner, who told her that her daughter was possessed by the Zodiac animal monkey. Later that evening, after Kyo was beaten again by Yuki through a ping-pong game that he didn't seem to know how to play in the first place, Toru offered to be his opponent. She, in turn, was beaten by Kyo ungracefully. Anyways, since Momiji and Kyo, in a way, had already given their White Day presents to Toru, it was Yuki's turn to give his, which was in the form of a blue ribbon for her hair. The gesture made Toru speechless and turned into a tomato. The next day, as the owner sent the gang off, Toru found out that Momiji was just a year younger than the three of them. He said that next spring, he and Haru would also be attending Kaibara High School. Meanwhile, at Shigure's place, the older Soma was gushing about the maid outfit he intended to give Toru for his White Day present. Haru was also there and quickly told Shigure that the FBI would be called on him for doing that. Fast forward to the first-year inauguration ceremony of Kaibara High. Yuki had been busy assisting the new students, and it seems like he's already being considered for the next student council president position. Meanwhile, Toru informs Hana and Uo that a couple of Somas will be joining their school this year. Hana tells Kyo to get his cousins and get them introduced. He refuses at first, but once Toru volunteers to go instead, Kyo has no choice but to come with her. It was only the first day, but the current student council president seemed to have already branded Haru and Momiji as troublemakers. Fortunately, Dark Haru resolved things in the most unorthodox but very effective way. Anyways, Toru invited Momiji to go meet her friends, and he enthusiastically agreed. Before following her, though, he told the other boys to stay back since Akito, who seemed to have come with them earlier, had wanted to talk to Yuki and Kyo. Speaking of the devil, the boys saw Akito approach Toru from afar. Although all Akito did was greet Toru as the Soma family head and ask her to take care of Yuki in the future as well, the boys didn't like that at all. Yuki didn't hesitate to come to Toru's side despite being scared of Akito. Toru seemed to have noticed how Akito made Yuki uncomfortable, so she made an excuse to separate them. Well, it's not just Yuki though, as it seems like even though he's considered an outsider, Kyo also has a strained relationship with Akito. However, the Soma family head's politeness seems to be a facade, as attested by Hatori and Shigure. After all, everyone knows how Akito rules over them through fear and torture, unlike Toru, who treats them with kindness and warmth. Back at school, Yuki, who seemed really shaken up by Akito's presence earlier, looked like he felt better after an exhausting badminton game with the rest of them. Weeks later, Yuki and Toru were tending to his garden. They were excited about the harvests they'd have come May. After a while, Toru decided to head back first to make lunch for everyone. On her way back, she noticed a bunch of clothes in the pathway and realized that perhaps another possessed Soma came to visit and started looking all over for it, only to scream shortly after when a snake suddenly crept up on her. Moments later, Yuki came running back to the house with the said snake in his hands and demanding for Shigure to skin it. As it so happens, the snake is indeed another possessed family member, Ayame Soma. And not just any other Soma too, but Yuki's brother as well. Although it doesn't look like they have a very good relationship, Yuki's anger is understandable at this time, since his brother suddenly crept up all over Toru. In Ayame's defense, he only did so because of the cold weather, which made him so weak. Before Shigure can do anything, however, Ayame transforms back to his human form and drags Toru away to have a lunch date with him, much to the boy's annoyance. Ayame brought Toru to a ramen shop and shared how Akito is the source of Yuki's traumas, and how Ayame himself regretted the fact that he wasn't able to be there for Yuki when he needed him most. Toru then tells Ayame, through her mom's wisdom, that even though there were things they regretted doing in life, it's also essential that they learn lessons from those regrets. Contrary to what Ayame believed, however, it doesn't seem like Yuki hated him. More like he just doesn't know how to deal with him. And if there's anything that he doesn't like, it would just be how Ayame latches himself on Toru like some perv. At school the next day, Momiji and Haru learned about Ayame's unexpected visit. Seeing as it had affected Yuki's well-being in some way, Haru seemed to know exactly what to do to resolve the situation. Later that day, Ayame was telling Toru and the boys about his high school days with Shigure and Hatori. They were tight back then. And although Ayame was considered a troublemaker in a sense, it didn't stop him from becoming the student council president. Then again, It was always Hatori who had to clean up his mess every time since he's actually the only person that Ayame actually listens to, much like how Yuki only listens to Toru. Not long after, Hatori came by to pick up Ayame, after Haru had snitched on him. Although it was mean in a way, the important thing is that Haru earned brownie points on Yuki. Toru's mom's first death anniversary is coming, so Toru asked Shigure if she could take a day off. Anyways, it was agreed that the boys, together with Hana and Uo, would come with Toru to the cemetery on that day. However, for some reason, Kyo seems to have some misgivings about it. Speaking of moms, Momiji happened to hang out with Toru on one of her shifts, and he started talking about how his own mom only knew him as another Soma child and not her own son. She was one of the parents who rejected their Zodiac-possessed baby, so they didn't have a choice but to erase her memories of him if only to keep him safe. Toru felt really sympathetic to Momiji's burdens. The only thing she could do was offer him a hug, even if it meant turning him into a bunny. Fast forward to the grave visit day. There wasn't even much cleaning for them to do since Toru's grandfather had already done so in advance. Instead, they just started having a picnic, which they knew would make Toru's mom happy. Once the day ended, Toru fell asleep by the living room, happy that she had finally introduced Kyo and Yuki to her mom. Tidbits of flashbacks, however, indicate that Kyo and Yuki had already met directly or indirectly with Toru and her mom in the past. Curious as to what their relationship might be? Keep tuning in to get your answers. And while you're at it, please like and subscribe to our channel. It'll let us know you appreciate our work and encourage us to do more. It was the Golden Week holidays, and Shigure suddenly decided that everyone, including Hatori, should go on a getaway in a cabin somewhere near a lake. Whether it was because Shigure just wanted to tease his editor, or because he thought that everyone on the trip needed it, can be debatable. See, ever since Toru and the others visited her mom, Kyo and Yuki have been acting weird, especially around each other. Only after an unexpected accident that turned them into their animal forms did the atmosphere between them improve, much to Toru's relief. As for Hatori, it seems that today is the day of his ex-lover's wedding, and Shigure, in his own way, wants to help his friend get his mind off it. Although it was sloppy, Hatori still tried to humor Shigure and went along with his antics. The next day, Ayame suddenly arrived in the cabin, much to Yuki and Kyo's annoyance. Thanks to Toru's encouragement, the three teenagers once again went for a walk around the lake, leaving the older Somas by themselves. Ayame had brought with him a picture of Kana from her wedding day to give to Hatori. Meanwhile, Shigure genuinely voiced his hopes for their friend to one day find the happiness that he deserved. Still, Hatori seemed satisfied with just not having to hurt anyone else anymore. It was summer, and Toru's section was having swimming classes. Uo found it sad that even though they were allowed to wear any swimsuit they wanted, Toru still insisted on wearing her generic school swimsuit. Well, it's not like Toru has no sense of fashion whatsoever. It's just that Toru couldn't afford to buy a new one. Feeling so bad about this reality, Uo decided that they should go swimsuit shopping for Toru and even invited Yuki and Kyo to come with them. Despite the boys' reluctance, they still came with the girls. Not that they did much other than hang around and be awkward in the girls' section of the store. Anyways, in the end, they got Toru a pink swimsuit, owing to Toru's mom, who used to be called the Crimson Butterfly, and her dad, who was often dubbed to be someone as pure as the color white. Later, Uo and Hana started telling the boys how they became friends. Although it wasn't really that special in Hana's case, Uo's was way more exciting. After all, she used to be in a gang and was first a huge fan of Toru's mom, back when she was still active in their gang group. Back then, when Uo heard that Toru's mom had a daughter her age, the young delinquent decided to go back to school, if only to meet Toru and get a chance to meet her idol through her. Uo was so disappointed at first when she realized that the daughter of her heroine was just a klutz. The worst part is that Toru's mom had turned into a doting parent, something that Uo just couldn't accept and understand, although it was understandable, seeing as she had come from a broken family and only had a drunkard of a father left. Continuing with the backstory, one afternoon Uo was being beaten up by other delinquents and had just managed to escape when she bumped into Toru, who did not hesitate to drag her to safety. Young Toru brought her back to their home and even helped Uo with her wounds. As Toru started making dinner that day, Uo couldn't help but feel jealous at how peaceful Toru and her mom had been living so far, even though it was just the two of them. In fact, it was just the start of the many days and instances in which Uo became a regular guest at their house. Toru's mom had always welcomed Uo, and even treated her like her own daughter. After Toru suddenly got told off by some of their classmates for being close with a delinquent like Uo, the latter decided that it was about time she stopped being in a gang. since it was becoming a liability to her one and only friend. However, leaving a gang is not an easy feat. Unfortunately, Uo was beaten up by her former gangmates for it. Toru's mom saved her then, after which Uo admitted that she wanted to be there for Toru as her friend, and was willing to change herself for the better to make it happen. Back to the present, the group was being harassed by some of Uo's former gangmates. But despite all the bravado and intimidation, it was no match for Hana and Uo's courage, which was greatly influenced by the life lessons Toru's mom imparted to them. One rainy afternoon, Yuki and Toru were walking home. Yuki shared his worries regarding the student council president position that was being offered to him. He's just not confident that he's capable enough for the responsibilities. Just then, they met Haru, who had a tiger cub with him. Toru was pretty excited at first, after she realized that it was another zodiac animal called Kisa Soma. That is, until the cub got defensive and bit Toru, making the latter faint. After they got back home, Shigure informed them that Kisa had stopped talking altogether after entering middle school. Haru assumed that it was due to being bullied at school. This time, Kisa bit Haru and suddenly ran away. Toru was quick to follow her to try and bring her back. Suddenly, Kisa's mother showed up and started reprimanding Kisa for not telling her that she was being bullied at her school. Just then, Toru remembered what Momiji told her about the different types of parents that those possessed by the zodiac animals have. And from what she could see, Kisa's mother is the overprotective type. And so, Toru tried to explain to Kisa's mom that Kisa didn't tell her because she loved her so much and didn't want her to worry. Suddenly, Kisa transformed back to her human form and immediately latched herself to Toru. Yuki also witnessed the scene and couldn't help but relate to Kisa's problem since he too had been in her shoes. Once they were back at home, Shigure offered to take Kisa in for the meantime to allow her and her mom some space to recuperate. Although Kisa still didn't talk, the next couple of days were spent with her always being by Toru's side every time she could. One day, Haru delivered to Kisa a letter from her teacher. In the letter, Kisa's teacher asked her to find something good about herself and learn to love herself through it. Yuki found this ridiculous since he believed that only other people could tell about someone's good points. Suddenly, Kisa started crying and talking again. She explained how she really didn't like her current self and wanted to change for the better and make friends. Yuki emphasized with her and promised her that whatever happened, they would always welcome her back in the house. Toru especially would always be waiting for her return. That night, Kisa went with Yuki to get Toru from her work. Toru was so happy when she finally heard Kisa's voice. Yuki also finally made up his mind to accept the president position, hoping that like Kisa, he could overcome his traumas one step at a time. One day, Shigure is once again in the middle of hide-and-seek with his editor Mitsuru, who is already at her wit's end since it's the deadline for his manuscript. After the lady left the house, she was shortly replaced by another ladylike individual who reminded Toru of the owner of the hot springs inn they went to. And so Toru immediately identified the newcomer as Ritsu Soma. Just then, Shigure showed himself and reprimanded Ritsu for being such a klutz who apologizes for the littlest things. Anyways, he was surprised by the sudden visit, although Ritsu didn't come for him but for Toru. It seemed like Ritsu had heard how most of the Zodiacs had already met Toru, and thought that this visit to her was long overdue. Toru truly believed that Ritsu was a lady, only to find out later that the lady was, in fact, a gentleman who just felt comfortable wearing female clothes. But Toru wasn't one to judge and was even genuine in her compliments on how his getup looked good on him. Anyways, shortly after Mitsuru comes back and finally manages to persuade Shigure to work on his manuscript, it didn't take long for Shigure to finish it. Unfortunately, due to Ritsu's clumsiness, a good part of the manuscript was ruined, making Mitsuru faint in distress. And while Ritsu himself is once again panicking, Shigure seems to be the only one amused by the whole ordeal. After a dramatic monologue and counseling from Toru, Ritsu came to terms with the fact that there's nothing wrong with wanting to live for the sake of others or with getting anxious and nervous while doing so. Once Mitsuru wakes up, she is told that Shigure is in the middle of rewriting the manuscript and tells her to buy some takoyaki with Ritsu while waiting for it. As they did, the two bonded a bit and realized they had a lot in common. They have such good chemistry too that they might just end up being together in the future. On another day, Toru was walking to her work when she met a foul-mouthed boy who seemed hell-bent on upsetting her. He later introduced himself as Hero Soma and only left Toru alone after he took her booklet containing her mom's picture. She was in a distressed state when Momiji found her and asked her what had happened. Hiro went to Shigure's house, where he also easily got on Kyo's nerves. Not long after, Toru arrived along with Momiji and Kisa. It was only after Kisa pleaded with Hiro to not upset Toru anymore that he finally tossed Toru's mom back to her. Well, Hiro isn't really mean. It's just that he feels jealous of Toru after Kisa talks about her all the time. He still needs to be punished, though, and so Toru does so by hugging him and finding out that he is possessed by the sheep Zodiac. As it turns out, the root cause of this misunderstanding between Kisa and Hiro was Akito. It seems like Akito got angry when Hiro told him that he liked Kisa. In retaliation, Akito punished Kisa, and so Hiro started ignoring Kisa, fearing that Akito would punish her again. Shortly after, Kisa started getting bullied at school as well. The rest is a history we've already resolved. To lighten the mood, Toru decided to bring Hiro and Kisa to the amusement park. Hiro didn't want to go at first, but after Kisa seemed to be really into it, the boy eventually gave in. Shortly after, another counseling was in order with Counselor Toru, as she imparted her motherly wisdom to the troubled Hiro for being a child despite wanting to become an adult already. Toru explained to him that even full-grown adults need to admit that a childish part will always remain inside them and that it takes incredible courage to admit to that. Long story short, Toru once again managed to tame another problem child of the Somas, using only her kindness and wits. We're almost at the end, guys. Have you counted so far how many Zodiac animals we've met? It was yet another typical day at Kaibara High, or at least that's what it's supposed to be, because it isn't. Not far from where Toru and Uo are, they could see Hana talking to two of Yuki's fan club members. Toru and Uo had conflicting opinions about it, but Hana later explained that they just wanted to interview her at her house about the waves. Uo and Toru wanted to come with her for backup, but unfortunately Toru had work later, so she couldn't. Anyways, as it turns out, it was all a plot concocted by Motoko and the rest of Yuki's fan club. They wanted to find Hana's weakness, which they could use later against Toru and separate her from Yuki. Classic jealous teenager move. And so, later in the afternoon, Hana welcomes the three girls into their home. Although not without a warning against mentioning their names while in the house, the suspicious part is she didn't really even explain why. As Hana was away preparing some tea, the three started snooping around her room, trying to find anything that they could use against her. That was when they found Hana's younger brother, Megumi, hiding in the closet, which gave them quite the scare. They later found out that although Megumi doesn't have the same power as Hana, he still has his own abilities, and that is to curse someone by simply knowing their name. Not long after, Hana's guests couldn't take it anymore and decided that enough was enough and they should just head back home. Hana didn't stop them, but not before revealing that she knew all along what they were plotting. She even pointed out harsh truths that the Prince Yuki Club didn't appreciate hearing. As for Megumi, he ominously spoke the girls' names one by one and sent them into a frenzied panic. Just then, Uo and Toru arrived. They told her that Toru asked to come in late for work so she could be there for Hana. It's times like this that although Hana could somehow relate to how Motoko and the others felt, she didn't resort to dirty moves like they did. The following day, the girls told Hana they wouldn't give up on their ways, even after all she said. But Hana couldn't care less, and in response she just told them that the curse would take effect in 3 days. It was the best comeback possible since it sent the trio into hysterics. This time, we will be visiting Hana's backstory. When she was just a kid, her psychic powers manifested. They were so strong that they were harming those around her. Hana eventually managed to control them somehow, but then the bullying started and intensified. The worst part is that Hana believed she deserved all that bullying. Megumi was worried about his older sister, but the only thing he could do was pray that someday she'd be able to find that friend who'd accept and cherish her for who she was. In middle school, Hana's parents found out about the bullying, so they decided to transfer her to a new school. That's when she met Toru and Uo, who didn't seem bothered by her spookiness and insisted on hanging out with her even when she tried to avoid them. Thanks to her new friends, Hana seemed to have changed a lot. That is until one day, after someone from her past came knocking back, she relapsed and her powers once again caused harm. But even then, Toru didn't shun her. It was then that Hana realized how Megumi's prayers had finally been answered. With time, Hana gained more control over her powers, but some things remained the same, and that's okay. Because whatever happens, Hana knows that her friendship with Toru and Uo will last. Not long after the final exams are finally over, although not everyone can celebrate just yet since some had to do retakes. One of those being Toru, who was so upset for failing one subject, especially since she failed on the subject that Yuki tutored her on. Hana then bragged that she failed all her subjects to make her feel better. Unfortunately, it didn't have the effect they were hoping for. Due to stress and anxiety, Toru became ill with fever. Shigure and Kyo ensured she could rest properly, and even Momiji tried to cover her at work. Later on, Hatori also came to check on her, followed by Kisa and Momiji. As for Yuki, he wasn't upset that she failed contrary to what she believed. He even brought her a workbook he promised they would work on together as soon as she felt better. Knowing that she had everyone worrying about her and taking care of her, Toru soon recovered and returned to her old self, just as much because she passed the retake exam with no problems. Later on their way home, Kyo realized that Kagura was back at Shigure's house. Of course, the older man shares the same sentiments as Kyo, since her visit meant his house would be in ruins again. To avoid such a disaster, Shigure sent the two of them to buy ingredients for dinner. As for Yuki and Toru, they decided to spend time in his garden. There was some drama at the grocery store, but Kyo and Kagura eventually went home on better terms. As they did, they were welcomed back by a man who seemed to be someone special to Kyo. The man is Kazuma Soma. He's the master of Yuki and Kagura and Kyo's adoptive father. His arrival meant that he and Kyo would start living together again. However, he told Kyo that he should just continue living at Shigure's for now, as it's what's best for him. This made Kyo upset, but it doesn't seem like Kazuma will be changing his mind. Later that night, Kazuma asks Toru to watch them as he confronts Kyo about the true form of the cat Zodiac spirit. It seems that the bracelet that Kyo wears all the time is what keeps his transformation at bay. Once Kazuma removed it, Kyo became an orange, otherworldly creature emitting a rotten smell. Realizing that Toru saw it, Kyo ran away from the house. It didn't take long for Toru to follow him without hesitation, leaving behind Kazuma, who genuinely hoped for the best. She tripped, fell, and vomited at the smell coming from Kyo. Toru doesn't know what to feel. All she knows is that Kyo needs her right now. Toru confronted Kyo once she found him, only for him to push her away violently. He fears receiving fake love made out of fear and pity again. Something that even his mother did until she eventually took her life when she couldn't stand it anymore. Fortunately, Toru isn't anything like his mother. She admitted that she fears him, but it outweighs her fear of never seeing him again, so she will stay with him no matter what happens this time. Let's just say she told him she loves him without telling him that she loves him. Thanks to her honesty, Kyo returned to his human form and later transformed into his cat form after willingly hugging Toru himself. Not long after, Toru returns home with a sleeping orange cat in her arms. Both of them had peaceful expressions on their faces, which Kazuma mirrored. The next day, Kazuma was on his way home and telling Toru how he first took Kyo in to atone for the things he did to his grandfather, who was possessed by the cat spirit before Kyo. He admitted that he seemed to have cuddled Kyo so much and was just glad and thankful that Toru was now here for him. Kyo soon caught up with them, and after having been a little more honest about their feelings, Kyo and Kazuma finally made up. Kyo promised his master that he would strive to better himself so he could someday be worthy enough to call him his father. Later on, everything has returned to normal, at least on the surface. Toru and Haru could tell that something had been bothering Yuki. After Haru tells Yuki that he's worrying Toru about his behavior, the prince decides to come clean with her. Yuki told Toru that although he was improving himself, he still hadn't reached the point where he was confident about everything. And that is why there are things that he can't tell Toru just yet. But he promised her that a day will come when he will. Toru just nodded and told him she'd look forward to it. Summer is fast approaching, and Toru looks forward to the days she'll spend with her friends. As a teaser, almost everyone had decided to eat dinner together at Shigure's house that day, including Hatori and Ayame, who even brought some precious crabs for them to enjoy. Not Shigure, though, as he had to return to the Soma state for some urgent business. Meanwhile, Hiro visits someone at the hospital. Her name seemed to be Rin, and she wanted to see Shigure for something. The end. Or is it? But this is it for us, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already. Our channel is still growing, so it would really help us if you could. Thank you so much for sticking with us until the end. See you in the next video.